This month we're going to do a project that I went and visited a few weeks ago, and to protect the innocent, we're going to remove all the names and locations. But this is an interesting, very interesting project. I got a call and a referral from manufacturer for this project. And the polishing contractor is a pretty good sized polishing contractor. I think they're general good reputation and fairly well known in the industry. And the project is a mid-sized cities convention center on the coast. So it's right on the ocean. And so this, unlike a lot of projects where I get involved early on and write the specifications and all that, in this particular case, I was called out on the job late in the process, as the project is generally complete, but the owner, the convention group for the city, is not wanting to pay the concrete polisher for their work. So they asked me to come in as the expert witness or expert to review the project and kind of look at the issues and see what's going on. So as with a lot of projects, I go look first and then I start digging in on the document. So on this particular one, I went and looked. It is, as I looked at the project, it has color, it has a dye, and a lot of the dye appears washed out. I found quite a bit of residue in some areas and a lot of very light dye applied in other areas. So that was one of the biggest complaints of the convention board. So you start looking a little closer. Well, what do you find? You find some big rock exposed, some medium rock exposed, some sand aggregate exposed, and a lot of concrete paste exposed, okay? Start looking at the edges where you have the most residual buildup. Edges are generally rough and pitted, porous. So, okay, so I see that. Find a few spots of scratches randomly throughout, where, quite a bit of scratches in a particular area. That was another concern that they had. And so start kind of digging in a little bit. We take a break, go eat, and I look through the specifications. Going all the way back to the beginning of the project, I think this project was set up almost to fail from the beginning. So polished concrete was decided very early on. It was one of the intended designs. In fact, when they started, they wanted, I think, 8 or 9 variations of color in this particular project. They ended up with 2. As I got into the concrete place and finish specs, I found that the first issue right off the bat that I found is they had 35% recycled material called out for in the specs. So a combination of fly ash and blast slag, 35%. Well, as you probably know from other videos, if you exceed 20% recycled material, then you lose the ability to get warranty on densifier manufacturers. You have issues with stain protect. You have all kinds of issues with the finish. Even disregarding any of the chemical side of things, when you get that high of recycled material content, a lot of times the surface will dry up really fast, and then as you're troweling the surface, you'll pull it away like too much peanut butter on bread. You'll just peel off the surface paste because it gets sticky. So that was the very first thing I noticed. Their water cement ratio was pretty low, had a lot of high range water reducer admixture in, so that introduces a lot more polymer into the mix from the beginning. The flatness levelness on this project was atrociously bad. The flatness was an FF20. Typically for a well done polished concrete job, you want an FF50. FF35 is probably the minimum tolerance, but the specs called for an FF25, and as far as I can tell so far on the project, nobody even tested for flatness. So levelness was a 15. Again, I don't think anybody tested for levelness. The sequence of construction was set up to fail. They had some walls up when they went to go pour the concrete, so they weren't able to trowel right up next to the wall, so they just used a hand trowel along the edge. So it's really pitted and porous and generally like pumice rock, just lots of holes and pits. You see some chatter and some choppy marks along the edge from the hand trowel pushing in. All throughout the project, everywhere that I looked, I saw a lot of footprints, boot prints all over the place. And then with that low of flatness, you've got to expect that you're going to have quite a bit of ups and downs, height variations throughout the project. So right from the beginning, I think this project was set up without a great finish in mind. And I think it was just lowest bid to the lowest bid of the lowest bid. So they got the lowest bid concrete guy, lowest bid mix. Some other things that I found out. First, the cure that they had specified and submitted as a dissipating cure. Well, that's great for the areas that were exposed to sun. But as I said, a lot of the walls were up before they even poured the concrete. So that stopped the UV light from getting to that dissipating cure, meaning that they just had a thick sealer on the slab in places when they showed up to polish it. The building was exposed, or the slab was exposed to the salt water for months, open on that side before any polishing showed up. So you can imagine the efflorescence issues. Salt transmitting through the slab and coming up on the surface is granular, etching and eating at the surface of the concrete finish. So that was pretty severe in spots. So then the contractor shows up to polish. Now this is the polishing spec on this project was interesting because it pretty much only addressed a chemical manufacturer. So there's very little discussion points about, how the polishing should be done, what steps should be done, what gloss levels, what clarity levels, any of the stuff that you might normally see in a specification for polished concrete. This project didn't really have it much. It just had what chemicals they wanted you to use, and it had that they wanted a bunch of dye samples, and there was a decent section talking about doing the samples. Interestingly enough, the section where the samples were done was on the opposite end of the building, way back in a storage area on a different pour, done at a different time with a different mix, and the furthest area away from the ocean side that you could get, and that's where they did the color samples and the polishing samples. So back of house area. Not even finished like the regular slab is finished. So you had low flatness. Then the specification left it open for just about anybody to bid it. The contractor bid, you're going cheapest bid. So this particular project was finished with a trowel polishing system. And so interestingly enough, I think trowel polishing systems have their place. I think there's really good uses for them. On really low flatness floors, I don't think they do very well. They take off a lot more of the highs and don't get into the lows near even as well as a good walk behind grinder does. Obviously, you've got a lot larger cutting path, so that lets you ride over a lot more stuff. So at the end, when they went to go put color in, they had a lot of high range water reducing admixture, a lot of recycled material content, so the concrete wasn't even in its colored. So you had more brown areas and more gray areas. Then you had areas of large aggregate exposure, which were high spots left from the finishing, areas of sand aggregate exposure, and then areas of paste only. Well, in addition to that, you had some spots with curing compound sealer left in the slab and some spots without curing compound left on the slab. So as you can imagine, the contractor sprayed a water-based dye because it was an environmentally friendly project. So they sprayed a water-based dye, which is fine. But the water-based dye doesn't take near as well as solvent-based dye. So a lot of that dye just sat on the surface. The contractor, I think, dyed it 7 times, trying to get an even take, had the manufacturers out, everybody out to try to help them get this project completed. At the end of the day, I think when they walked off the job or completed the job, they didn't walk off like, I'm going to leave the job without finishing. When they completed the job, I think the slab had decent color. It doesn't, maybe not as great and consistent as the owner would have wanted, but there are a lot of outside factors that went into that, as discussed. But I think the color appeared to be pretty decent in most areas. There are some pockets of a lot of residue left that that probably could have or should have been addressed. But a lot of those end up also being in the more porous areas of the slab. So, maybe the pores held on to a lot more of that color than the rest of the slab did. Fast forward to the time that I showed up. Now, at this point, the facility's been turned over now for almost 6 months. It's been in operation and use for most of that time. one of the things that I went to go look at when I was there, after reading the specs and just kind of looking at the job, is I asked about their maintenance procedures. So I go, the facility staff takes me to the back and they go to show me their cleaning room. And sure enough, the cleaner that they're using is actually a wax stripper. I'm going to repeat that. The cleaner that they're using in the auto scrubber is made to strip wax off of a floor. So it has a heavy solvent compound, has a decent acid in it too, and they're putting that in a scrubber, an auto scrubber, and running black pads on an auto scrubber with a stripping compound. Well, you can imagine what that's done to the color that was in the slab. They're taking that off in every clean. The particular colors they ended up with is a blue and a green. I asked the janitorial staff, hey, is your water colored at all? Oh yeah, it's really blue, lots of blue, and every time we scrub it, lots of blue. I'm like, well, you see that's color that you're taking back out of the concrete. So in this particular case, I'm in an interesting spot here that I've written a report for the project that talks about some of the shortcomings. I think the polishers in general did the specification in which they bid and what they were contracted to do, but I just don't think that process is the right process for the project. So I want to kind of go into a couple of things that I would have done differently. First, read the concrete place and finish specs. If the flatness isn't there, call that out. You need to have a flatter floor. The variations in aggregate exposure and the variations in depth of the grind absolutely contributed to the color related issues, because the rock doesn't take color. So therefore the brown rock shows clearly against the blue where the paste only took the most color. So I would have dealt with the flatness. I would have discussed the recycled material content right off the bat, because that affects not only the color but also the finish and also the way that your chemicals react on the slab too. I would have discussed the edges and talked about how important it is to do the edges correctly. If in lieu of doing the edges correctly, if that's not an option, I probably would have recommended that we do an epoxy border along the edges, kick out 4 to 6 inches and do an epoxy paint border. You can even try to match the dye color, or you can match the wall color. In either case, that's going to look a lot better than a pitted, porous, chattered, hand-finished edge. So I would have addressed that. Talking about the cure. For most of our projects, I specify either a water-based cure or a water cure where they keep the slab wet for 7 days, or a penetrating, film-forming, oxygen-dissipating cure. These type of cures, they go into the slab, cure very consistently and evenly, keep relative humidity the same all the way through, and they dissipate at 30 days. They dissipate at 30 days with oxygen only. So it doesn't really matter if you have UV light or not. I would have done the sample in the area that we were going to actually polish, because I would want to show them the edges, the ups and downs of the variations and the height differences and what that looks like after it's been ground. I probably would have recommended a switch to a solvent-based dye, like an acetone-based dye, like a Ameripolish Classic. In this particular case, I think the penetration would have been a lot better. I think that without the recycled material content, the densifier would have held in a lot more color, because it would have had the ability to react appropriately. And I would have, and in this particular case, the polisher did bring them the right pads and the right cleaner. We found that at the site, never been opened. So I don't know whether you address the janitorial and maintenance at the beginning of the project before it even starts, and just make sure that the owner's on board. But if you use the wrong cleaner, it almost doesn't even matter how good your job is. You can damage the finish. I've looked at other projects. I had another one last week where, when the polishing was completed, the gloss is averaging around 62. 3 to 5 months later, with the wrong cleaners and wrong pads, the gloss is averaging in the 30s. So they've lost half their gloss or more in a less than 6 month period by using the wrong products. So I probably would have addressed the maintenance early on. And at the end of the day, I think this particular project, I think the polisher did what they were specified and contracted to do, but I think that they could have probably early on addressed the issues and gone a different route. And I know that's a little bit of a risk to take, but I think maybe a deep grind exposed the aggregate everywhere through this particular project would have at least given it a more consistent finish. That would have changed the overall perspective, but there are a lot of convention centers that have terrazzo, so that's what the finish would have been more indicative of. I don't think that there's a great way with an FF of 20 or 25 to get a consistent even polish with a consistent even color, almost no matter what work you do on the slab. So that's our monthly project profile. I hope that this particular story has helped you, gives you some ideas about things to look for in projects that you're working on or projects you have coming up. Feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to communicate with our members, and we can help you look at specifications and design characteristics of projects ahead of time. And so feel free to reach out to us if you're a member. Thanks. Have a great day.